The emotional outburst was a grieving sister reacting to the news of her brother's death, Dr. Fleming finished for her, not an unstable pilot. We made a terrible mistake 5 years ago and then compounded it by not giving you a path back. He turned to indicate the other officers. Some of us recognized that mistake almost immediately, but by then you had disappeared. Your records were sealed. When Lieutenant Morgan Chase appeared in the pilot selection pool with suspiciously perfect test scores, but an unremarkable background, I had my suspicions. "You knew?" Elise asked, looking at Dr. Fleming. "I suspected. Your neural patterns are as distinctive as fingerprints, but I needed proof before I could approach the command staff. Your performance today provided that proof." Colonel Barnes cleared his throat. "Captain Reeves, what you did was also technically illegal. Identity fraud, falsifying military records, these are serious offenses." Elise straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir, I understand." "However," he continued, "in light of the extraordinary circumstances and your actions today, those charges are being set aside. Your original commission is being reinstated with an immediate promotion to captain effective 5 years retroactively." Elise stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Sir, your back pay and benefits will be calculated accordingly," Colonel Barnes added, the hint of a smile finally breaking through his stern demeanor. "Though I imagine the paperwork will be a nightmare for someone in administration." For the first time in 5 years, Elise felt a real smile spread across her face. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you. The X-79 program needs a new head test pilot, now that you've shown what that aircraft is truly capable of." Dr. Fleming handed her the wings, which she accepted with slightly trembling fingers. The weight of them in her palm felt right, like coming home after a long journey. "Captain Reeves," Dr. Fleming said formally, "do you accept this position?" Elise's smile broadened as she pinned the wings to her flight suit. "Yes, sir, I do." "Good." He extended his hand, this time for a proper handshake. "Welcome back." As they shook hands, Dr. Fleming lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Your brother would be proud." Elise felt tears threatened, but managed to hold them back. This time, showing emotion wouldn't be held against her, but old habits died hard. "Permission to remain with the X-79 program, sir?" she asked Colonel Barnes formally. "Permission granted. In fact, we're putting you in charge of pilot training. Your understanding of the aircraft systems and handling characteristics is unmatched." The medical team had finished checking Lieutenant Mercer, who was now walking toward them under his own power, looking confused. "What's happening?" he asked, glancing between Elise and the senior officers. Colonel Barnes turned to him. "Lieutenant Mercer, meet Captain Elise Reeves, your new commanding officer." Mercer's eyebrows shot up. "Reeves? The same Reeves who wrote the paper on spiral instability recovery that we studied at the academy?" "The very same," Dr. Fleming confirmed. Mercer looked at Elise with new appreciation. "You saved my life up there. That maneuver, I didn't think it was actually possible." "Neither did anyone else," Elise replied with a small smile. "That was its first real-world test." Mercer shook his head in amazement. "Well, I'm glad you were there to test it on me, Captain." As the group began walking toward the debriefing center, Elise felt a profound shift in her reality. For 5 years, she had lived as someone else, suppressing her true abilities, hiding her brilliance. Now she could finally be herself again, could finally reclaim not just her name, but her full potential. The debriefing was extensive. Engineers and flight analysts pored over every second of data from the emergency, asking Elise to walk them through her decision-making process. The Kazanov Reversal would now move from theoretical possibility to documented recovery technique, potentially saving countless lives in the future. The key insight, Elise explained to the rapt audience, projecting flight data onto the main screen. is understanding that certain types of instability can actually be leveraged to generate controlled momentum. Most pilots try to fight the spiral directly, which depletes their energy and control authority. The reversal temporarily accelerates the spiral in a controlled manner, then uses that momentum to snap back to stable flight. But the G-forces involved? One engineer objected. The structural stress on the airframe? Are within design tolerances, if executed precisely, at least finished. That's why it requires such exact timing, half a second too late, and the spiral becomes truly unrecoverable. Dr. Fleming watched from the back of the room, a satisfied expression on his face. This was what should have happened 5 years ago. Elise Reeves sharing her revolutionary ideas with colleagues who appreciated her brilliance. After the debriefing, as the room cleared, Colonel Barnes approached Elise with a tablet. Your new security clearance and credentials are being processed. You'll need to update your biometrics. She placed her palm on the tablet scanner, then let it capture her retinal pattern. The screen flashed green, then displayed her official military record, now showing her real name with all commendations restored and the dismissal expunged. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. Colonel Barnes hesitated. Captain, I owe you a personal apology. I was on the board that dismissed you 5 years ago. Elise looked at him, surprised by the admission. We were wrong, he continued. We confused emotional expression with emotional instability. The military has changed since then. We've learned that perfect stoicism isn't always the best quality in a pilot. Sometimes the ability to process emotion quickly and move forward is more valuable than never showing emotion at all. Elise nodded, accepting his apology without needing to speak. Your new quarters are being prepared. And tomorrow at 0800, I'd like you to begin developing a training program for the X-79. We'll need more pilots who can handle it, especially now that we know what it's truly capable of. Yes, sir. As Colonel Barnes left, Elise found herself alone in the briefing room. She sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events, from the verge of exposure and disgrace to reinstatement and promotion in the span of hours. It was almost too much to process. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Mercer stood there, now in his standard uniform rather than his flight suit. Captain, he said with a respectful nod, some of us are heading to the officers' club to celebrate not dying today. I thought you might want to join us. Elise hesitated. For 5 years, she'd kept everyone at arm's length, afraid that getting too close would risk her secret being discovered. Actually, she said, making a decision, I'd like that. The officers' club was buzzing when they arrived. Word had spread quickly about the emergency and the extraordinary recovery. As Elise entered with Mercer, conversations paused, then resumed with increased energy. A young lieutenant approached hesitantly. Captain Reeves, I studied your paper at the academy. It's an honor to meet you. Before Elise to respond, another pilot joined them. Is it true you designed the Kazanov Reversal as a cadet and then actually pulled it off today? Suddenly, she was surrounded by fellow pilots, all asking questions, expressing admiration. There was no suspicion in their eyes, no judgment for her past deception, only professional respect and genuine curiosity. For the first time in 5 years, Elise allowed herself to engage fully, explaining her theories without holding back, laughing at the right moments, being truly present rather than constantly vigilant. It felt like breathing freely after years underwater. Later that evening, she stood alone by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Dr. Fleming joined her, offering a glass of water. How does it feel, being yourself again? Elise considered the question. Strange, she admitted. Wonderful. Terrifying. Terrifying. I spent so long being careful, being less than I could be. Now there are no more excuses, no more hiding. It's all on me. Fleming nodded, understanding. The X-79 was designed to function at the edge of instability. Captain, that's where it performs best. Where most aircraft would fail, it excels. Perhaps some pilots are the same way. Elise smiled at the comparison. Maybe so. One more thing, Dr. Fleming said, reaching into his pocket. This was recovered from your original file. He handed her a small photograph, creased and worn. It showed Elise and her brother in their flight suits, arms around each other's shoulders, both laughing. "Thank you," she whispered, her vision blurring slightly. This time, she didn't fight the emotion. The next morning, Elise rose early. Her new quarters had been prepared as promised. Her few possessions moved from Lieutenant Chase's smaller room. On the desk sat her official reinstatement papers, her captain's bars, and a new name badge, Captain E. Reeds. She picked it up, running her thumb over the engraved letters. 5 years ago, she had been labeled unstable after one emotional outburst and kicked out of flight school. She'd rebuilt her life from nothing, created a new identity, and fought her way back to where she belonged. As she pinned the badge to her uniform and headed to the flight line where the X-79 waited, Elise reflected on the strange symmetry of her journey. The very qualities that had once been used to ground her, her intensity, her passion, her willingness to push boundaries, were now recognized as essential to her excellence. The hangar doors were open to the morning sun. Flight crews and engineers parted respectfully as she walked toward the aircraft that had changed everything. The X-79 gleamed, its sleek black surface reflecting the light, its design balanced perfectly between stability and its opposite, just like her. Elise placed her hand on the aircraft's surface, feeling the connection between them. Both had been misunderstood, both pushed to their limits, both vindicated in the crucible of crisis. "Captain Reeves," called the technician approaching with a tablet, "the modifications you requested for the neural interface are ready for your review." Elise smiled. "Thank you. Let's get started." The day stretched before her, full of possibility. There would be new pilots to train, new boundaries to push, new maneuvers to design. After 5 years in the shadows, Captain Elise Reeves was finally back where she belonged, not just in the cockpit, but at the forefront of aviation, where the air was thinnest and only the most exceptional could survive. She was exactly where she was meant to be, balancing on the beautiful, powerful edge between stability and its opposite, where true excellence lived. 5 years ago, they labeled her unstable. After one emotional outburst, they took away her wings, her career, her identity. Now, she flies under a different name, keeping her brilliance dimmed just enough to avoid detection. But when an experimental aircraft begins spiraling toward catastrophe, the maneuver she performs to save it will reveal everything. She's tried to hide. Some call it impossible. The military calls it the Kazanov Reversal. No one has executed it successfully in 25 years. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about redemption against all odds, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives that challenge our understanding of human potential. Lieutenant Morgan Chase stood at attention, shoulders squared, her breathing controlled. 5 senior officers of the X-79 experimental aircraft program sat behind a long table, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the briefing room. Her service record lay open before them, along with her psychological assessment and flight simulation scores. Colonel Barnes, the program director, tapped his pen against the table as he studied her file. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, his eyes calculating and cold. "Lieutenant Chase, your performance metrics are unusual. Exceptional technical skills, but your psychological profile shows some concerning patterns." Morgan kept her expression neutral, despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Sir, with respect, I've completed every required assessment with scores well above standard requirements." "The X-79 program isn't just any assignment," Lieutenant Colonel Barnes replied, leaning forward. "These aircraft cost billions. They're notoriously unstable at high altitudes. We need pilots who can maintain perfect composure under extreme stress." At the end of the table, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses studied her with uncomfortable intensity. Dr. Fleming, the program's chief psychologist and one of the original designers of the aircraft's neural adaptive interface, his gaze seemed to penetrate beyond her carefully constructed facade. "Tell me, Lieutenant, Dr. Fleming said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Have you ever experienced control loss during high-stress situations? A memory flashed, unbidden, screaming at a flight instructor, tears streaming down her face, the news of her brother's death still raw. The sympathetic looks quickly replaced by clinical concern, then suspicion. The word unstable stamped in red across her file. Morgan maintained eye contact with Dr. Fleming. No, sir, never. Dr. Fleming held her gaze a moment longer before nodding slowly, clearly unsatisfied with her answer, but unwilling to press further. Something in his expression suggested he sensed the lie. Colonel Barnes closed her file with a decisive snap. You'll begin simulated training tomorrow at 0600. Dr. Fleming will monitor your neural patterns during the exercises. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Thank you, sir. Morgan saluted crisply and exited the room, maintaining her composure until the door closed behind her. Only then did she release a shaky breath. The corridor was empty. Morgan leaned against the wall for a moment, studying herself. 5 years of meticulous planning, of buried identities and reinvention, had led to this moment. She was back where she belonged, almost. Later that evening, Morgan walked alone through the massive hangar housing the X-79 prototype. The aircraft was unlike anything she had ever seen. Sleek, predatory lines with control surfaces that could reconfigure mid-flight to adapt to changing atmospheric conditions. Its matte black skin seemed to absorb the hangar lights rather than reflect them. She ran her fingers along the edge of the aircraft's wing, feeling the unexpectedly warm surface. The material was classified, some new composite that responded to electrical impulses like artificial muscle. Beautiful, isn't she? Morgan spun around to find Dr. Fleming watching her from several yards away. She hadn't heard him approach. Yes, sir. Extraordinary design. Dr. Fleming moved closer, his eyes on the aircraft rather than on her. The X-79 doesn't just push the envelope, Lieutenant. It redefines it. We've created an aircraft that hovers at the edge of instability by design. Controlled instability provides superior maneuverability, Morgan said, unable to hide her technical knowledge, though it makes the aircraft nearly impossible to fly without computer assistance. Dr. Fleming's eyebrows rolled slightly. You've studied unstable aircraft design? Morgan felt a chill of warning. She'd revealed too much. Just the basics from flight school, sir. Dr. Fleming didn't seem convinced. You know, Lieutenant, the most successful test pilots aren't the ones who never experience fear or doubt. They're the ones who acknowledge those emotions, process them, and continue functioning at peak performance. Morgan maintained her professional mask. I'll keep that in mind, sir. Do. He turned to leave but paused. Oh, and Lieutenant, the simulators will test more than your technical skills tomorrow. They'll test who you really are. After Dr. Fleming left, Morgan stood alone with the X-79, her heart racing. His words had carried an unmistakable subtext, as if he suspected something about her wasn't quite what it seemed. She closed her eyes, and the memory she'd tried so hard to suppress came flooding back. 5 years earlier, a different flight deck, a different name. Cadet Elise Reeves, top of her class at the academy, had just landed from a routine training flight when her commanding officer approached with a grim expression. Her brother's reconnaissance plane had been shot down over disputed territory. No survivors. The grief had been immediate and overwhelming, but it was her reaction during the mandatory psychological evaluation the next day that destroyed her career. When the evaluator suggested she take compassionate leave, Elise erupted, screaming that flying was the only thing keeping her sane, that grounding her would kill her as surely as the missile had killed her brother. The outburst lasted less than 60 seconds, but it was enough. Emotionally unstable, read the report. Despite her perfect record, despite test scores that broke academy records, despite her groundbreaking thesis on recovering from spiral instability, that was still being taught to cadets. Elise Reeves was summarily dismissed from flight school. No appeal, no second chance. One moment of raw humanity had been deemed incompatible with the perfect composure required of military pilots. Morgan opened her eyes, back in the present. Her fingertips traced the name badge on her flight suit. Lieutenant M. Chase. The false identity had taken years to construct. A new background, academic records altered, flight certifications earned under her new name. She deliberately kept her performance excellent but unremarkable, hiding the true extent of her abilities, until now. The X-79 program was everything she'd been working toward, the chance to prove herself again, even if no one knew who she really was. Morning came too quickly. The simulator room was cold, clinically bright. Morgan sat in the mock-up cockpit, electrodes attached to her temples measuring her neural responses through the simulator's view screen. She could see the virtual landscape of mountains and valleys she would navigate. Dr. Fleming's voice came through her headset. This simulation will test your response to system failure at high altitude. Ready, Lieutenant? Ready, sir. The simulation began smoothly. The virtual X-79 handled like a dream as she put it through basic maneuvers, testing its responsiveness. Morgan felt herself relaxing into the familiar role. The joy of flight, even simulated, washing over her. Then the first system failed. Hydraulic pressure dropped on the port side, causing a slight roll. Morgan compensated easily. Excellent correction, Dr. Fleming commented. Now we'll increase difficulty. The next 30 minutes were a progressive cascade of failures, each one more challenging than the last. Morgan handled them with textbook precision, keeping the aircraft stable even as its systems deteriorated around her. Behind the scenes, Colonel Barnes watched Morgan's performance with growing admiration. "She's good," he murmured to Dr. Fleming. "Very good." Dr. Fleming nodded, his attention fixed on the neural pattern displays. "Too good, perhaps." Meaning her responses show advanced pattern recognition. She's anticipating system failures before warning lights appear. Dr. Fleming adjusted his glasses. It suggests prior experience with similar scenarios. Her record shows standard flight training, nothing specialized. Dr. Fleming tapped a key, bringing up a different screen. "I took the liberty of running her neural response patterns through our database." Colonel Barnes frowned. "That's not standard protocol." "No, it isn't, but look at this." Dr. Fleming pointed to two waveform patterns displayed side by side. The left is Lieutenant Chase's response to crisis situations. The right is from our archive of exceptional pilots. Colonel Barnes leaned closer. "They're similar." Not just similar. The right-hand pattern belongs to Cadet Elise Reeves, recorded 5 years ago during her final year at the Academy. Colonel Barnes straightened abruptly. Reeves, the one who was dismissed for emotional instability, the very same most promising pilot of her generation, until that single outburst. And unless I'm very much mistaken, she's sitting in our simulator right now, in the cockpit, unaware of the conversation. Morgan was fully immersed in the simulation. The scenario had escalated to critical failure, multiple systems offline, the aircraft entering a spiral dive toward a mountainous region. Standard recovery procedures weren't working. The simulated X-79 continued its death spiral, altitude dropping rapidly. Morgan felt sweat beading on her forehead, but her hands remained steady on the controls. A memory surfaced, her thesis on spiral instability recovery, the theoretical maneuver she designed but never had the chance to test, the Kazanov Reversal, named after a Russian aerobatics pioneer. No one had successfully executed it in a real aircraft. It existed only in theory and computer models. Without conscious decision, Morgan's hands began moving through the sequence, a counterintuitive combination of throttle adjustments and control inputs that momentarily worsened the spiral before using the aircraft's own momentum to recover stability. In the control room, alarms sounded as the simulator detected the unusual inputs. "What is she doing?" Colonel Barnes demanded. Dr. Fleming's eyes widened. "She's attempting the Kazanov Reversal." On the simulator's external screens, they watched as the virtual X-79's descent initially worsened, plummeting toward the virtual mountains. Then, impossibly, the aircraft began to respond. its trajectory changing from deadly spiral to controlled descent, then level flight. "My God," Colonel Barnes whispered. "She did it!" Dr. Fleming's expression was a mixture of vindication and awe. Only one pilot ever theorized that maneuver in detail, and now we know for certain who's in that cockpit. In the simulator, Morgan completed the recovery, bringing the aircraft to stable flight. Her heart pounded, but her breathing remained controlled. She'd done it. The theoretical maneuver she designed years ago had worked, even if only in simulation. The comm system remained silent for several long seconds. Then Dr. Fleming's voice, unusually gentle. "Excellent work, Lieutenant Chase. Simulation complete. Please report to briefing room A immediately." Morgan removed the neural sensors with trembling fingers. She knew what had happened. In the heat of the moment, she'd revealed herself. The Kazanov Reversal was her signature, described in detail in Elise Reeves' thesis. No one else would attempt it, let alone execute it perfectly. Her deception was over. As she left the simulator, Morgan straightened her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity. She'd proven what she set out to prove, that she belonged in the cockpit, that one emotional moment didn't define her abilities or her worth. Walking down the corridor toward briefing room A, Lieutenant Morgan Chase prepared to become Elise Reeves once again. Morgan hesitated at the door of briefing room A, gathering her courage. Whatever happened next would determine the rest of her career, if she still had one after her deception was exposed. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. To her surprise, the room was empty except for Dr. Fleming, who sat alone at the briefing table, studying data on a tablet. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable behind his wire room glasses. "Lieutenant Chase," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Morgan sat stiffly, maintaining perfect posture. "Sir, I can explain." Dr. Fleming held up a hand. "In a moment. First, I want to discuss what happened in the simulator." He turned the tablet toward her, showing the flight path of her simulated recovery. "This maneuver, the Kazanov Reversal, tell me how you knew it would work." Morgan weighed her options quickly. Lying further seemed pointless. "I designed it, sir. In theory, it exploits the inherent instability of the spiral to generate counteracting momentum." "Yes, I know." Dr. Fleming's eyes held her steadily. "I was on the review committee for Cadet Elise Reeves' thesis 5 years ago. It was brilliant work, never practically tested until now." The silence between them stretched. Morgan knew she should say something, but words failed her. "Your deception was impressively thorough," Dr. Fleming continued. "New identification, altered service records, even cosmetic changes to your appearance. What I can't figure out is why Colonel Barnes hasn't joined us yet. I sent him the moral pattern comparison 20 minutes ago." Morgan's stomach dropped. "You knew?" "I suspected from our first meeting. You have very distinctive eye movements when processing complex flight data." Dr. Fleming set down his tablet. "The question is, what happens now?" Before Morgan could respond, her secure communication device buzzed with an emergency alert. She glanced down at it, then back at Dr. Fleming, confusion evident on her face. "That's the emergency Scrabble for the X-79 test flight, but that's scheduled for next week." Dr. Fleming checked his own device, his expression changing from surprised to concerned. "Schedule's been moved up. Weather window opening unexpectedly. Colonel Barnes is already at the flight line." He stood quickly. "We'll continue this discussion later. For now, you're still on the roster as Primary Systems Officer. Lieutenant Mercer is pilot in command." Morgan felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. She'd be in the cockpit, but not as the pilot. Still, it was better than immediate arrest for identity fraud. "Yes, sir." She stood, snapping to attention. Dr. Fleming paused at the door. "Lieutenant, regardless of who you were or who you are now, you're the most qualified person for this flight. Don't hold back today." 20 minutes later, Morgan strode across the flight line in her pressure suit, helmet under her arm. The X-79 gleamed in the morning sun, ground crews swarming around it in final preparation. Lieutenant Jake Mercer, the designated test pilot, waited at the base of the boarding ladder. "Chase." She acknowledged with a nod. "Ready for this?" Morgan nodded professionally. She trained with Mercer in the simulator for weeks. He was good, steady, by the book, with excellent reflexes. But she knew the X-79 systems better than anyone, having studied the theoretical designs for years before her dismissal. "Weather systems moving in faster than expected," Mercer explained as they climbed into the cockpit. "Command wants data on high-altitude performance before it hits." The cockpit was tight, with Morgan seated slightly behind and to the right of Mercer. Her station controlled all major systems while Mercer handled flight controls. The experimental neural interface connected to both of them, allowing the aircraft to anticipate their needs based on brainwave patterns. Pre-flight checks complete, the canopy sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Morgan felt the familiar calm settle over her as she ran through her procedures. This was where she belonged, in the sky, pushing the boundaries of flight. "X-79, this is Control," came Colonel Barnes's voice over the comm. "You are cleared for takeoff. Maintain heading 270 after departure. Climb to test altitude, 45,000 feet." "Control, X-79 copies," Mercer responded, "taking off now." The X-79's engines ignited with a deep rumble that Morgan felt through her seat. The thrust pushed them back as the aircraft accelerated down the runway, lifting off with surprising grace for such an advanced machine. The ground fell away rapidly as they climbed through 10,000 feet. In the command center, Dr. Fleming watched the telemetry data streaming in, his eyes darting between multiple screens. Colonel Barnes stood beside him, arms crossed. "Systems nominal," Dr. Fleming reported, "neural interface functioning at optimal levels." Colonel Barnes nodded, then lowered his voice. "We need to talk about Lieutenant Chase." "Later," Dr. Fleming interrupted. "Let's focus on the flight test." Back in the X-79, Morgan monitored the aircraft systems as they continued their climb through 30,000 feet. Everything functioned perfectly, the experimental aircraft proving remarkably stable despite its advanced design. "Systems performing within expected parameters," she reported, neural interface calibrated and responding. Mercer nodded, handling the aircraft with confident precision. "She flies like a dream approaching test altitude." As they leveled off at 45,000 feet, the X-79 sliced through the thin air, the sky above them darkening to a deep blue, the curvature of the Earth visible at the horizon. "X-79, begin systems check protocol," came Flight Director Walsh from Control. Morgan began the sequence, methodically testing each system and reporting results. Her movements were precise, economical, the product of thousands of hours of training and natural talent. In the command center, seeing unusual readings from the primary stabilization system, Fleming moved quickly to the engineer station, studying the data. A cold weight settled in his stomach. Cross-check with redundant sensors. Colonel Barnes joined them, his expression tightening as he reviewed the numbers. "Could be sensor malfunction, or it could be actual system degradation," Fleming countered. "Either way, we need to alert the crew." Before he could reach the comm, alarms began blaring across the command center as multiple warning lights flashed red. "Primary stabilization failure," the engineers shouted. "They're losing control authority in the X-79." Morgan's training took over as warning indicators flashed across her console. Her hands flew over the controls, rapidly assessing the cascading failures. "Primary stabilization system failing," she reported calmly, switching to backup systems. Mercer fought the controls as the aircraft began to shudder. "Control, X-79 aircraft becoming unstable. Request emergency descent clearance." "X-79, this is Control. You are cleared for emergency descent. Engage backup systems and prepare for return to base," Flight Director Walsh responded, tension evident in his voice. Morgan engaged the backup stabilization systems, but her screens immediately showed insufficient response. The X-79 began to roll unpredictably, entering the beginning stages of a spiral. "Backup systems engaged, but insufficient," Morgan reported. "Lieutenant Mercer suggests reducing altitude immediately to increase control effectiveness." Mercer nodded grimly, beginning the descent. But as they passed through 40,000 feet, he suddenly gasped and slumped forward. "Mercer!" Morgan reached forward, checking his pulse. It was strong, but he was unconscious, likely from a rapid pressure change in the cockpit that had affected him but not her. The aircraft, now without active control, began to pitch downward more steeply. "Control, this is Lieutenant Chase," Morgan called urgently. "Lieutenant Mercer is unconscious. I have primary flight controls." In the command center, panic spread as the situation deteriorated. "She can't fly that thing alone with compromised systems," Colonel Barnes said, his face pale. "The neural interface is calibrated to Mercer's patterns." Dr. Fleming moved to the main communication console. "Lieutenant Chase, this is Dr. Fleming. You need to engage autopilot return protocol immediately." "Negative, sir," Morgan's voice came back eerily calm. "Autopilot requires primary stabilization. Request permission for manual recovery attempt." The room erupted in tension as controllers exchanged alarmed glances. "That's suicide at this altitude with compromised systems," Colonel Barnes exclaimed. Dr. Fleming studied the flight path projections, which showed the X-79 entering a potentially unrecoverable spiral. Conventional recovery methods would fail with the system's damage they were seeing. "Let her try," he said quietly, certainty building inside him. "Are you insane?" Colonel Barnes demanded. "She's the only one who can save that aircraft," Fleming insisted. "Lieutenant Chase, you are cleared for manual recovery. Do what you need to do." In the cockpit, Morgan took a deep breath, her hands steady on the controls. She was back in her element, facing impossible odds with only her skill and knowledge standing between life and death. The X-79 continued its spiral descent, passing through 30,000 feet. Warning systems blared as G-forces built. Morgan quickly adjusted Mercer's harness to keep him secure, then focused entirely on flying. She began the sequence of control inputs that she designed years ago, but never tested outside simulation. The Kazanov Reversal. The aircraft initially responded by worsening its spiral, exactly as the theory predicted. In the command center, engineers watched in horror as the X-79's descent rate increased dramatically. "What is she doing?" someone shouted. Dr. Fleming leaned forward, eyes fixed on the trajectory data. "Wait for it," he murmured. Morgan continued the precise sequence of inputs, feeling the aircraft respond to her commands despite the damage. The neural interface, designed to adapt to pilot brainwaves, began syncing with her patterns instead of Mercer's. The X-79 seemed to come alive under her touch, as if recognizing a kindred spirit, an entity balanced on the edge of control and chaos. Gradually, impossibly, the spiral began to arrest. The aircraft's descent slowed, then stabilized as Morgan completed the maneuver. She transitioned smoothly to level flight at 15,000 feet, the X-79 once again under control despite its damaged systems. The command center erupted in spontaneous applause and cheers. "She did it," Colonel Barnes whispered, awe evident in his voice. "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Dr. Fleming corrected quietly, "just never successfully executed by anyone except its creator." "The Kazanov Reversal," the flight engineer said, recognition dawning. "That was Elise Reeves' theoretical maneuver from her thesis, but no one's ever actually performed it successfully in flight." "Until now," Dr. Fleming said. Colonel Barnes turned to him sharply. "Fleming, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Lieutenant Morgan Chase doesn't exist," Dr. Fleming gestured toward the main screen, showing the X-79's now stable flight path. "That aircraft is being flown by Captain Elise Reeves." On Morgan's comm, Flight Director Walsh's voice came through thick with relief. "Lieutenant Chase, status report." Morgan checked her instruments, noting that all remaining systems were functioning within parameters. Mercer was beginning to stir beside her, regaining consciousness. "Aircraft stable, sir," she replied coolly. "Lieutenant Mercer is recovering, requesting clearance to land." As the X-79 approached the runway, Morgan felt a strange sense of peace. Her deception was over. The maneuver had revealed her true identity as surely as a fingerprint. But she had saved the aircraft and her fellow pilot. Whatever consequences came now, she had proven what she set out to prove. She brought the experimental aircraft down with textbook precision, touching down gently despite the damaged systems. As the X-79 taxied to a stop, emergency crews rushed forward. Morgan completed shutdown procedures and removed her helmet, turning to check on Mercer, who was now fully conscious, but disoriented. "Chase," he mumbled. "What happened?" "Systems failure. You blacked out. We made it back." She kept her explanation simple as medical personnel helped him from the cockpit. As Morgan descended the ladder, she saw a line of senior officers waiting on the tarmac. Dr. Fleming stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Colonel Barnes and several others from the original board that had dismissed her years ago. This was the moment of truth, the end of Morgan Chase, and perhaps the final judgment on Elise Reeves as well. She squared her shoulders and stepped forward to face her past.